Okay. And so they created this fraternity, and it became a very large industry, and under the basis of sharing ideas is really what it was, and then it really evolved into networking. What it's meant to me is whenever you're in business, you should have. By the way, you guys need to. I'm a terrible networker. I'm terrible at it. And yet ICSC really gave me an opportunity to where I felt much more comfortable doing it. So it's a business contact. To me, it's a great business contact organization. It's a resource for content for our younger people, and from my career when I grew up in this business. I've been doing this for 40 years, 40. So this was where we got a lot of content. And people told you, hey, this is how you manage a shopping center. This is how you lease a shopping center. This is why you build a shopping center a certain way, and so on and so forth. So but again, this is about your future, and you guys are in school. Whatever industry you choose, you need to be part of that. Every industry has an organization like ICSC, not as good as ICSC, but they have them, and you need to be part of all that. It would be one advice I would give you. Make sure, because I think it helps you be a student of the game. And I think that's one of the real takeaways from today's conversation. Whatever you're going to do, make sure you're a real student of the game that you're in, because that'll pay you great dividends. And I'll explain that to you later if you don't understand what that means to be a student of the game. But that's what ICSC means to me, Michael.
Yeah, I think that's just a great way to open it up, especially as we're in this crisis right now. And I would like to say that, this is just a great community that we've all, been able to gather here today. So I think that we're all here for each other in this ICSC community, especially as ICSC and the world at large faces a challenge. So I want to just start, before we get into, the crisis and COVID-19, how did you get your start in the industry, and what were those points of success that enabled you to get where you are today?
Well, like I said to everyone before, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I really came about it in a very unusual way. Not unusual, but I had no intentions of ever working in real estate. I was a business major out of Cal State Fullerton. And all I knew is that I seemed to have a pretty good mind for business, but frankly, I wanted to go into athletics of some sort, whether it was pro. I worked in pro soccer 40 years ago, which there actually was pro soccer 40 years ago. And I also wanted to be an athletic director or something like that, maybe even a football coach or whatever. And it didn't work out. And I had a brother, my late brother, Dan Donahue, who started the company. He was a young guy with Tom Schriber, and they were at the front end with some of those pioneers of the shopping center business. This would have been in 1968, 69. And Dan and Tom bought the company. The owners of the company financed Dan and Tom in 1976 after they opened a big regional mall. They were a very small company doing big malls, and I was working painting houses after graduation. It was a very similar time as right now. Interest rates were 18%. The world was in a huge, deep recession, and there was very little job opportunities at all. So I was, like I said, I was doing whatever I could to make the rent. So I was doing landscaping and painting houses and delivering phone books right out of college. This was immediately when I graduated, and I went in one day, and this was my brother. Now, he was 13 years older than I was, so frankly, I didn't really know him that well. I'm the youngest. He was the oldest of 5 boys. I'm the youngest of 5 boys. And he and I, his partner, Tom Schriber, said, why don't you come and work for us? And I said, because Dan and I will kill each other. And he goes, well, what else are you going to do? And I said, well, that's a pretty good point. So I started working at $4 an hour. This is a true story, $4 an hour. And it took me, the old adage was it took you 5 years to learn this business. Well, I must be perfectly average, because at 5 years, I finally started to enjoy it a little bit. I really didn't like it much. But I started to find a place for me in a very small organization with two very entrepreneurial guys that didn't want any conflict or any responsibility for growing an organization. And so I kind of found a place where I became their problem solver. And I wasn't wired like they were. They were very sales oriented and, ready, shoot, aim, we used to say all the time. And I was much more process oriented and more organized. And that was what they needed around them. So that was now 40 years ago. I can tell you, I tell this all the time to students, whatever you do, just do something, get in something and get started, because you never know where it's going to end. There is not a scenario where I'm your age, whether that's 20 years old to, I hear there's graduate students on the phone, maybe somebody's 30 on the phone, and everything in between those two numbers. There isn't a scenario where I would draw up that I would ever have been the CEO of this company. So don't take too much time planning all the, your next step and your next step and your next step. There's too much life goes along, and you have to be ready. You have to be prepared. But the idea of you trying to force it or control that, I think, is a very, very perilous place to be.
So I really want to hit on the crisis that we're facing now. And I wonder if you could, put it in context, what's happening in your business now. And then maybe even if you could opine on, what was going on in the industry pre-COVID and maybe even post-COVID, what you could think might cause the industry to evolve.
Okay, well, that's a lot of questions. So
it is.
But let me take the first one and give you a sense, guys. In 40 years, I've never seen anything quite like this. Like I said, you should be a student of the game, and we've tried to do that. And in the Great Recession, the financial recession of 2008 through 2012. We really learned from that and made a lot of adjustments. And we said to ourselves, we're going to be prepared for the next time. Although the only problem is the next time isn't going to look and walk and talk like this one. And that's exactly right. Let me give you a brief example. I was on the phone yesterday with the head of real estate for LA Fitness. And he says, Pat, we've run sensitivities to our business like, well, okay, what happens if disaster sensitivities. What happens if an earthquake hits California? Okay, I gotta close 150 units until we dig out, but then all of a sudden we get it back. And what if it happens a big hurricane in Miami? Well, I gotta, same 150, I gotta close those. Never in any scenario did he come across that he would have to close all 750 of his stores in one day. They're closed. You can't get them by government order. He can't open. And so the implications and the backdrop and the backstories to all of this as it goes is really unprecedented. It's unprecedented. So having said that, now it's like something we haven't seen before. Having said that, all of our centers, and you guys read, hopefully you read my bio, but we own and operate about 60 neighborhood centers. So we have a market, a drugstore, shops, and they're really great centers all around the West Coast from San Diego to Seattle. But they're neighborhood necessity retail. So every one of our shopping centers is open, and that may be a surprise to you. Every one of them is open because we have what's called essential retail, and those guys can stay open. So our grocery stores, drugstores, gas stations, financial institutions, and fast food drive-through guys are doing fine, and they'll pay us our rent. So about half of our tenants, however, are closed by government mandate. So it's a very unusual time. We expect it to cost us roughly $50 million, million on a revenue stream of about $180 million on an annual basis. This is what we think it'll cost us this year. So that gives you a little bit of scale as to what I'm talking about and how it relates to our company. There are a lot of conversations about how you're going to go solve this and all, and what happens, and does this change the format of retailing forever and all that. I don't, I'm not a real believer in that. I think one of the questions you asked, I think I'll take the third question in next, Michael, and that where does this end up? My sense is that this it'll look like a V in economic terms. I think we will come out of this very quickly. And I say that because this looks to me more like an actual event, an economic event versus a structural economic problem. When I look at the Great Recession, we didn't find the bottom for 18 months. When I look at the recession of 1990 and 91, we didn't find the bottom for 2 years. There was a real estate recession in those time frames when we invaded Iraq. And so you just didn't know what you were up against for so long. This to me is more like an actual event, a little like Katrina, and a little like, in fact, Katrina is probably the best example for this group. And while it was awful, once you got the storm and it got to landfall and it blew itself out, you sat there and then you had to survey the damage, and then you had to dig out and improve, what you had. Most of you don't realize that coming out of Katrina, because of two things, pent-up demand, and you guys are mostly business students, so you know what that is, but pent-up demand and then the capital that comes in to a crisis like this, either government or private, are tremendous economic engines. And so I really believe that we'll come out of this rather quickly because of those two things. Love or hate Trump, I think that the package that they've put together is addressing a lot of issues, and I think is going to be a positive across a lot of fronts to keep us back open. So my sense is we're going to have a very difficult April, May, and June from a business from any standpoint. I mean, obviously you're all hunkered down, or we're hunkered down. And that's going to be very, very difficult. We think the next 3 months will be half as difficult. So if you're off 50%, for the first 3, we think we're off 25% the next 3. And then we think by year end, we should be back open and operating at probably 85 to 90% of where we were. All of this contingent upon this virus, and a vaccine and a solution to it, right? I don't know what we're dealing with. It depends. I can't keep up with any of that. There's so much information, right or wrong. But assuming that it is controllable and controlled and we're not worried about it circling back around here in October or January again, right? And assuming we get our arms around it and we got the best minds in the world working on it, and it's an organic problem. It comes from a rat, I think, or from a bat. I mean, you'd think that they'll figure that out, right? They'll figure that out. So if that does happen, I think we come back and get back to where we were. And that leads me really to part 2 of your question, is that,
okay.
and that's where we were and where you guys were. And again, as graduate students and as seniors, first off, let me say I'm very sympathetic and want to send my thoughts and prayers to you that you missed a lot of that last piece of your senior year in college, and I know that's a terrible, terrible disappointment. Some of you may have been athletes and you had your seasons canceled, but at a minimum, your people that you didn't get to end your year as you saw it, and that's just the way it is, and it's terrible. And I just want you to know we're sympathetic to that. But going into this, I can tell you, while there was a lot of conversation about shopping centers, and there were some issues, and a lot of conversation about retail from a non-mall standpoint, that's a whole nother subject. The mall is a whole nother subject. But from a non-mall standpoint, our business was outstanding. And you wouldn't guess that reading, listen to the newspapers. But our occupancy was at 97%. Our rents were going up 10% a year on our rental turn. I mean, our business was really good. And it was, why was that? Well, it was because it was one of the greatest job markets in history. Everybody was working. I don't think business is this complicated. The economy runs 70% on the consumer, right? I don't think you have to look at too much more, right? If the consumer's winning as a retail operator, you're going to win. The malls are a whole nother subject. That's probably for another phone call. But retail and necessity-based retail and daily goods and services and the things that we do that we need to do that we can't buy on the internet today, they're all done in these centers that we have, and it was a fantastic business model. It will be a fantastic business model. And like I said, I think we'll come out of it rather quickly, depending on how soon the virus is controlled. But we're not putting a lot of people that are highly, the labor that's going out can be duplicated. People will want to go back to work quickly, and I think there'll be enough demand for them to go back to work. I really do. Pent-up demand is a really powerful economic engine that's very, very hard to quantify. And so, and I've seen it in action, not just with Katrina. I saw it in Los Angeles when we had a big earthquake in 1994, and it was just amazing what happened. And I don't know about you guys, but the first thing I'm going to do once they give us the all clear is I'm going to go out and go out to dinner and have a beer with somebody, in a cool restaurant. Maybe go to the movies. So, so that's what I think, Michael. That's a long answer but that was a long question.
Yeah, perfect. I ask long questions and we get the good long answers. So we have quite a few students who have written in with their own questions. So I'm going to pivot to them and stop kind of leading the conversation. And we'll stay longer just to make sure we get to every question. So if you have a question, go ahead and type it in. So first one, we have Ashan Kadam. He's a senior at Rutgers, and he would like to know the difference between your perception of the East Coast and the West Coast real estate markets.
Sean, that's a great question. I can't answer that very effectively because I am simply West Coast. We're San Diego to Seattle, as I mentioned, and I don't know much about the East Coast. I will tell you, in a different answer to your question, is this is certainly the two places where investors want to be. They want to be along the coasts and also along the south and into Texas. But the center part of the country really is not of interest from the institutional investors. But I don't know the difference between all of this now. I'm assuming that question is based in normal times. With the virus, clearly the East Coast is right now much more impacted from a incidence and death rate than we are out here so far. They say it's coming, but I'm sorry, I'm not a great resource on that one. If you're on the East Coast and you want to go to work in real estate, though, there's going to be a lot of opportunities once this thing settles. There's a lot of great companies, and the world's financial headquarters is New York, so a lot of it happens along the East Coast.
Alrighty, so we've got Jude Mason, an MBA at Rutgers as well. As far as the closed tenants, what flexibility are you offering in terms of rent for the next 3 months? And also wants to know, what are lenders offering you in terms of flexibility, aside from Fannie and Freddie?
I would say Jude is a graduate student. Those are those are advanced questions. Jude, we've never been hit with rent relief requests like this. I mean, everybody has just, said, "Hey, we got to get rent relief." Now, having said that, we believe there's three kinds of tenants. There's those that ask because it's really good business to ask, and they don't need it. And so they usually get a nice letter that says, "Thanks, but no thanks, we're not going to do that." Then there's the tenant in the middle that really needs it. And if you give them 2 or 3 months of abatement or waiving the rent, you're going to help them make it because without it, they probably don't make it. Then the third group is the ones that even if you gave it to them, they aren't going to make it. So we really focus on that middle section. What we're doing right now is we're deferring April and May's rent. If somebody just calls and says, "Hey, and we make them go through the steps of why they're going to do this." For instance, we have a number of Panda Expresses. You guys have all been to Panda Express. And so, he's a billionaire, right? The guy that owns that. It's all owned personally. And we have units with him that are outstanding units. And Andrew's a friend of mine, so I can speak like this. I mean, he's a business friend of mine. If Andrew calls me, I'm going to say, "Andrew, you didn't give me any extra rent when you were killing it in our Del Mar center because we were under construction and all the contract workers were there. You didn't give me any extra. So why, this is your problem. This is both of our problems. Let's see." That sounds a little heartless, but that's what I would do with a Panda Express or somebody that's got a fantastic business model and has to weather this. This isn't, I didn't shut them down. The government shut them down. I don't know why this is my problem, but they all think it's our problem. So we have to do something. We are sympathetic. We will defer rent. What we've talked about doing is, like I said, 2 months, and then with some sort of repayment on the back end of the lease. Whether you add 2 months, whether you amortize it over next year or over the balance of the lease, we haven't determined that. I have had guys call me. Ulta called me the other day, I thought, with a very elegant solution. They said, "Pat, we're going to pay our triple nets. We're not going to pay April. We're not saying we're not ever going to pay it. We just don't know where we are, and we're going to table the conversation after 30 days and maybe at 60 days." And I was fine with that. I thought it was a good solution from where we are. Again, the government has said these guys can't go. I haven't. With regards to the lenders, we haven't gotten anything specific from the lenders that say that, "Hey, don't worry about your loan payment this month." There's been none of that, and we will make all our loan payments this month. But we have heard anecdotally that the lenders are looking at this much differently than they did the great financial crisis. You have to realize that in the financial crisis, they were the ones in crisis. They had their own problems. The banks were under siege by the government and by whoever could get their hands on them. And we as borrowers were just one more problem. So that all just trickled down, and they just, that was just a terrible situation for them. In this instance, they appear to be standing to the side and letting operators operate. And I think there will be some consideration. I don't think they're going to give you free loan payments, but they may, again, tack it on to the back of the loan. They may, in fact, let you amortize some more interest payments into principal. We haven't gotten there yet, but right now the word is, and all indications are, that the banks look like they're going to work with landlords to try and weather this. Now, what does that mean for me? So we have covenants whenever you borrow money, and we're $3.5 billion, so we have about $1.5 billion in debt. And it's all over the place. It could be life insurance debt. It could be bank debt, syndicated loans, all sorts of different stuff. Not much CMBS at all. We stay away from that. But we have a syndicated line banks, and it's all the best banks in the country, and they go and they take the whole thing. And let's say it's $500 million, and so they judge our cash flow on a testing basis, right? So they take a look And they test you just like the doctor wants to test you once a year. So they're going to test us. And when this test comes up, the previous 3 months are going to be March, April, and May on the test. Well, you can imagine we're going to look really sick during that test. So if we fail the test, we have to remargin our loan, meaning we got to put money back in. And if we borrowed $500 million, that now has to become $450 million because our cash flows don't support the $500 million. So again, we have to go find $50 million, right? Now, our board can do that, but we don't want to do that. And the word is right now, while we have it in our cash flows to remargin and take down equity from our shareholders of the $50 million, the word is that we may not have to do that. So with regards to the bank. So we'll wait to see. Everybody seems to be saying the right things at the moment. We'll see how it plays out.
So our next student, Jensen Samuels, is at SMU, Southern Methodist in Dallas, and he's wondering about finding internships for the summer and how COVID-19 has affected the market there, and what you would do to recommend on how to find an internship with these times.
Yeah, that's a very, very good deal. First thing I would do is I would stay. I don't know if you guys realize this, but ICSC has an intern program, and go into their website and they've sourced internships throughout the country, and that would be the first place I would go to see if there's something along somebody down in Dallas or where you may not live in Dallas or somewhere where you live at home to go do this. I think across the board, it will be very difficult for internships. I think a regular company is going to say, "Hey, I'm not dealing with that right now. I can't. I got too many, problems." However, I think if I believe that those that have committed to ICSC, I think they'll leave those internships open, and they'll do everything they can to do that. ICSC has a real initiative about future talent, so I would be. I'll be shocked if the people that have said, "Hey, we have interns." For instance, JLL had 50 internships. I don't think he'll drop that. He may drop it a little bit, but there'll be internships at JLL this year. So my best advice is use ICSC. Other than that, I think you got to be, this is your timing is atrocious. And that doesn't mean this will end, guys. This is going to end. We're going to go back to doing all the things we used to do. Some things will be better. Some things won't be as good. But we're going to go back to going to football games at SMU, and hopefully Rutgers gets better. I think they will with their new coach. But we'll be back to normalcy. But I think for the summer, internships are going to be difficult. But again, I'd use ICSC.
Is there anything, Pat, you would recommend to gain experience or set yourself apart if you can't find an internship?
I think one of the things you got to do in this time frame is not just play video games, right? I think somebody's going to ask you, hey, well, you just got out of school. Yeah, the market was terrible, but what did you do? What did you do to improve yourself? So I would say first and foremost, I would do any job that you can have, because I just think working creates inertia, and you meet people, and it can be you learn more on the terrible jobs, right? I was a bus boy, right? I was an oyster shucker. I did all this stuff too, and like I said, I painted houses, I pulled landscaping, and did all that kind of stuff, and you learn what you don't want to do. So that's where you are right now in your life. You're there learning not necessarily what you want to do. I'm not sure you ever find out what you want to do, maybe, but I think you got to learn what you really don't want to do, and you do that by testing. So if in fact when this thing lifts, I think internships will come back very quickly, but the summer may be over with, right? So summer internships may be a problem. But I would do any kind of work that you can do to learn through this. You learn more, guys, in a crisis than you learn doing anything else. This is what separates leaders from regular people. It's crises. It isn't when it's good. Anybody can lead when it's good. But when it's tough and people are questioning every decision anybody's making, that's when a leader steps up. So for you to go and work at the grocery store that needs people, and go look at the places that need people, just to do that, because in that interview, they're going to say, what'd you do during this? Well, I hunkered down and didn't do anything. Now, if you can't work for some reason, you're nervous about working or whatever, then you got to turn to books, right? And then it's got, you got to be able to sit across the table from the person and say, I took that time frame and I read, these are the books I read to try and improve myself. These were the things I was trying to prepare. Again, what were you doing? You were a student in the game. You were a student of the game. You were an understudy. You did everything you could to improve yourself. And that, I think, is really all there is to you right now. You keep active. You work at anything you can work at. And in light of that, in addition to that, is read a lot. And it doesn't have to be specific to real estate. It could be, hey, I just read a New York Times bestseller. Or this was my favorite book I read this summer. And that'll give people an insight into how you think and what you're interested in and those kind of things. I hope that helps.
Jensen is on video and he's nodding, so that's good.
Okay, good.
So Greg Showalter from Ohio State, so we're getting more diverse in the country, was talking about how you mentioned that this was an economic event, but people have been anticipating a recession for several years now. So he's wanting to know, was this the pen that popped the balloon?
Yeah, I really don't think so. I really don't. Now, I may be proven wrong, and we're going to have probably more fallout of tenants. And and again, I look at this in my own world. I don't have enough capacity to look at the whole, everybody's business, every other business. I don't know what this is going to do to the car business. I gotta imagine it's a great time to buy a car here in a couple of months, guys. But I don't think this is going to pop the balloon. Frankly, we didn't really believe we were on the verge of a recession in the things that we were seeing, because people were working. I'm a firm believer, as I said before, watch the economy and people are working. I also watch gas prices very closely, because gasoline prices are basically a tax cut or a tax increase. We all have to use it. And it right now, and has been, very, very cheap. And so that's money that goes right into the consumer's pocket. I mean, can you imagine that this economy may be no more complicated than giving everybody $1,200? I mean, this is the second time now in 14 years that we've done this. You guys won't remember, but George Bush did this in the recession. And he was going to send everybody $625. And you said, what the hell is that going to do? Well, somebody's back there saying, well, if you put this amount in people's hands, it's going to drive the economy. So, no, I don't believe, like I said, I think we come out of this more quickly and stronger than ever. There's too much capital going to go into the solution, and there's too much pent-up demand for us for it just to linger. I don't see it. I don't see it.
Well, Pat, we've got another Rutgers MBA. John Johnson wants to know, what kind of documentation are you using to separate out your Panda Expresses of the world from your more mom and pop type tenants?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. Somebody's doing something with the Scarlet Knights. They're good questions here from the Scarlet. And then Scarlet Knight, Rutgers is Scarlet Knights, right? I think that's right. We're using a very simple form for when we do approve it. It's a 2-page form that says, hey, we're going to waive this, and we're going to talk about it. We're not waiving it. We're deferring rent, and this is what happens. So it's a real simple document. It's not as simple as I'd like it. I'd like it to be half a page, but because of attorneys and all that, it has to be 2 pages. But it's a real simple document that we're using. And most people are doing that. We have a big landlord out here, you guys, the Irvine Company. They own 20% of Orange County, California. They have a bunch of shopping centers, really fine shopping centers. And this is Donald Bren. He's probably one of the top 10 richest people in the U.S. No, he's very understated, and he probably would only be on the Forbes list of. He'd probably be in the top 50, but he'd probably in the top 10 if you look at his holdings. And he doesn't give anything away. And last week they went to 900 of their 1,400 tenants and offered a deferral of April, May, and June to be repaid next year, amortized and paid over in 21. And he didn't send it to grocery stores and drug stores and fast feeders, as I mentioned, that are doing business and are open and operating. But he did send it to his other tenants, and it sent me a message that he thinks this is going to be a very difficult 3 months, and that the same thing, he thinks you're going to be able to pay this back in after the first of the year, and because we're going to be coming back, not because he wants the money. He doesn't need the money. He wants the money. But I think he felt the same way, that it would come back rather quickly. So, and he did that with a very simple 2-page document. And this is probably one of the most sophisticated landlords in the country. So they are doing things I think we are doing some things that we should be doing in simplifying this process.
Well, that is all the questions that we have, but I want to just linger a little bit and give a shout out to all of you for coming to this event. Again, my name is Michael Cowden, MCOWDEN at ICSC.com. If you want to give me any feedback on future events or thoughts. We're doing another one of these conversations tomorrow, and then on April 14th, check out your email. Our communications vehicle to our student members is called Opportunity Knocks, and we'll be sending out another one of these featuring HR executives in the industry, and they'll be giving you even more tips on what's going on with hiring, how to secure that internship, and all of that sort of good advice. So we're trying to do as much as possible to expose students like yourselves to these titans in the industry. So Pat can't hear it, but we're all giving you a round of applause for giving us your time and insight today. Pat, any closing thoughts for you?
No, you guys just, this too shall pass, right? And so don't, this isn't going to define you. It's not going to define your future. It's not going to define our country. This is a problem. It's a big problem, but we're going to get through it, and we'll come back stronger for it. And there's no place like this country in the world, you guys, and there's no better place to make a living. And this is a great industry you can go into if you're interested in it. And, people tell you retail's dead. Retail ain't dead. Retail ain't dead by a long shot. And just, again, be a student of the game. And people are going to go to shopping centers. And now the mall business is real difficult. I get that. And that's a whole nother subject. I'd close by saying, if you do have the time, Jimmy Moran is a real titan of this business. Jimmy actually is a rocket scientist. He has his degree in aeronautical engineering or whatever. And Jimmy's a great guy from the South in Louisiana. And do me a favor and ask him a question tomorrow if you're on it. Just say, Pat Donahue wants to know if he ever caused you any trouble, and you'll get a chuckle out of him.
That sounds great. Well, I think we need the hashtag trending student of the game. Is that right, Pat? Is that what I got?
That's what I would say. Yep. Student of the game. Yep. Student of the game. That'd be good.
So if you're bored, read a book, do whatever you can to, make yourself better prepared for when we come out of this.
Yeah. And we'll be out of it sooner. It's right now, it looks like it's never going to end. This too shall pass. It'll end. We'll be back in it and back doing what we know how to do. And we'll be, in a lot of ways, we'll be better for it. So God bless everybody, and you guys all be safe and healthy out there.
Will do. Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you all for coming today.
Okay, Michael, you're welcome.